Hey there, sweet peas. Welcome back to Friendless. I'm your pal James Avramenko, back once more with a brand new interview. This week, I welcome back to the show lighting designer and inspiration for one of the central characters in my novel Out of Town, the one, the only, Anton DeGroot. Anton is one of my favorite people in the entire world, and we got a chance to unpack what it feels like to become a fictional character, how art impacts interpretations of love, navigating changing careers in your 30s, and so much more. It was so much fun catching up with Anton, and you're going to love this interview, so buckle up and enjoy Anton DeGroot here on Friendless. We just before we hit record, you were telling me a little bit about your sort of adventures through Europe, and I just I can't imagine like the impact on the body that that like the travel has like on the brain. You know, I was telling you about my early mornings, but it's like that's nothing compared to like adjusting to like it being a different day.
Absolutely. And I got to make that transatlantic flight twice this summer, which is pretty fun. I guess two or yeah, four times I guess if you count each direction. The first time it was for a bit of a longer trip, which was great. Just went to Scotland. My partner Meg is doing her PhD at the University of Glasgow. Meg Wilcox, former guest of the Friendless podcast,
Yes.
so she's been doing her PhD remotely for the last 2 years or so, and has never actually met any of those people in person.
Wow.
So yes, she was going there. So I went along just for about 3-4 days or so, and then she stayed in Glasgow in Scotland. I flew down to Prague in the Czech Republic, where I was attending the Prague Quadrennial of Performance Design in Space, just a giant conference filled with nerds like myself who think think they can make a living as theater designers in the world. It's pretty fabulous. It's the third time I've gone. It goes every 4 years. This is the second time that me and a colleague of mine teach our class about devised scenography. And yeah, it was pretty fantastic. And then Meg met me there. We flew down to the south of France and just bummed around and hid in a tiny middle of nowhere town for like
God,
a week and a
sounds like
half. It was
fucking
great.
paradise. Did you
Yeah.
find like in which direction did you find your body adapting easier? Was it like going from Canada and then taking up the European clock, or was it leaving Europe and coming back to the Canadian clock?
Definitely going from here out to Europe.
Really?
100%. I feel like I was done in like one night. Like I was fully
Yeah.
recovered from jet lag. Just, both times when I arrived in Scotland, I was there for like, I think our flight arrived rove around 2 o'clock, something like that. Get the baggage, find the hotel, kind of settle in, and then it's just enough time to like surface, take a walk around, have a bite to eat, grab a beer, head back, and then just do your damnedest to stay up as late as you possibly can, which is like
Right,
seven
sure.
thirty, 8 o'clock, and then sleep all the way straight through, and then kind of good to go first thing in the morning. But like I got back a week ago today, and I think last night was my first uninterrupted good night's sleep coming back in this
Love it.
direction. Yeah.
Fuck. And that's the other thing, isn't it? Is that because you're losing all that time, you have to kind of account for it. Um, I've been putting off a trip to Europe for years, and so anytime I hear anybody went, I have to like fight through those like it's almost like those like vagal systems of like I have to fight through the freeze, and then I have to get through the like anger and the jealousy so that I can get into the like connective version of just like that's incredible, and like
Cool.
and the different spots you saw. To lend a little context to why you were out there, I want to double back just a little bit, just for context for listeners. I know we talked about it in the last interview, but for anyone who like hasn't listened to that episode or who's not familiar with your work, would you mind just giving like a little kind of like who the hell are you kind of intro? Because
Oh yeah.
that really relates to what took you out to, especially into Prague and Edinburgh.
Oh my gosh, of course. Yeah, I think so. What I do is I work in the Canadian theater as a designer and a scenographer. So that means I focus on set design, lighting design, and sound design are my three elements that I do that. And I kind of work contract to contract, whomever is interested in bringing me along for a job or interested in my vision or I'm interested in theirs, and that's really what I do. And then around that as well, I do a fair amount of teaching. I teach a class at the University of Calgary, doing that kind of work. Do some work with younger students, high school students, kind of around other theatrical works. Yeah, and so that's what I've been doing that for 20 years. I had a small sabbatical around the pandemic when literally everyone in my business was having a bit of a sabbatical,
Yeah,
when
big
all of
time.
show business shut down. Um,
Yeah,
but whereas I worked as an architectural lighting consultant, I think I had just started that gig, honestly, when we chatted last time. But I've
that's
been out of
right.
that for 2 years now. So that, I
Right.
think, that'd
What
be
pulled
4
you
years
away
ago.
from that? What pulled you away from the sort of like the corporate world and pulled you back into the arts?
It was a combination of things. First and foremost, I really did very much enjoy the work that I was doing. I found it quite
Mm,
creative. However, the particular company that I was working with, I found them to be less amenable to how I kind of like to live my life in the world. And I don't mean like, I don't, I guess I don't mean like they were resentful of me wanting to come in late. That's not what I mean.
sure.
What I mean is that I found there was a real disconnect in terms of values, just for myself
Mm,
and for them. Definitely that particular company, prolific, hardworking group of people, but definitely run by 80s guys.
yeah. Okay.
So,
Okay.
and myself, I just found it was harder pushing up against that. And if I wanted to,
Mhm.
I felt that if I wanted to succeed in that particular business, working for that particular company, that I was going to really have to start to look at where my values lie and start to put those aside and start to like,
Yeah.
oh, actually, it's okay if I, stomp on, the careers of my female colleagues. Oh, like
Mm,
that's a lot of my female colleagues were leaving, because they felt they
yeah.
couldn't get ahead, and me seeing that, and among other, very narrow-minded conservative, lowercase c conservative, values and mindsets. It just I didn't want to be party to that, and so that
Sure.
was kind of the big thing. But also, like, I wanted to go back to work where all my friends are,
Yeah. Big
and
time for sure.
and yeah, and where I'm good at something, right? Like
Hmm.
starting another career when you're in your late 30s was like
Scary.
surprisingly difficult and a bit scary, and like
Yep.
I was able to speak the language of design to many of the colleagues that I work with, but there were so many little gaps in the knowledge, like the process of how construction works and these
Hmm.
things that everyone else around me all knew, but they didn't know how to communicate it. So I was often always catching up, and I was always
Hmm.
felt like I didn't know what I was talking about, and so much
Right.
energy. So it was nice to be going to a place back to a place where I'm unexpert. I don't have to be the expert in the room, but being
Hmm.
unexpert amongst other experts is extremely fulfilling. And just I
Yeah.
feel like I can actually contribute and do something of value.
Well, and that's such an interesting, that feeling of like unexpert versus the expert. Like it's like I feel like I understand that so deeply in that it's like you want to be around like-minded people, and hearing you talk about like yeah, the work's good, but I'm spending my days with people I don't want to be spending my days with. Like that's one of the easiest, quickest soul crushers, right? And I think
Yeah,
myself included, I've been in situations where it's I've justified staying in situations because of the core work, but the team around me is not doing it. It's not doing it for me,
yeah,
right? And that is definitely one of those like magical lures of theater, isn't it? Of the like, there's this
yeah,
built-in like buddy system, right? And
yeah,
for some people, like, for myself, it's like that. I think that kind of burned me in the end, but it's also like it is
mm,
it is such a comfort if you find the right team and the right community for it, right?
I totally agree, 100%. And I find it interesting just how lucky I think that I had been,
Mm,
in my life, like just in terms of like I acknowledge all sorts of, privileges in how I get ahead in the world, in coming up in the aughts and the 2010s and all that. However, um, and what's interesting is, like, in a way, my values were never super super challenged in that
Hmm.
way. Like, generally, 8 times out of 10, I saw eye to eye with almost everybody that I was working with. Certain
Sure.
outliers, of course, many of which who have left the business,
Yeah.
by their own choice or not, in the
Yeah.
past couple of years, certainly. But it was so interesting to be confronted in a place with people whose values were completely different from my own. Not, I mean, not completely,
Sure.
but like
Yeah.
politically and socially in a lot of ways. And just how, like, they were good people for sure. They
Mhm.
weren't, if you called them out, they would staunchly defend themselves as being good people, but at the same time, just like seeing sort of these ingrained ways of working was fascinating,
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
fascinating. And it's like, it's it is changing even in that business, I think.
Mhm.
And I don't know, who knows how long that company will be around. but
Sure.
but like, there are a lot of evolved minds there, but just that's not where I was working at that time. So
Yeah.
yeah, some great
Is that
people for sure.
interesting?
But
That
yeah,
thing, I feel like I'm hearing something about sort of like that iterative change, right? And how it's like, I think something I've encountered in the past and continue to encounter is this frustration of like when you see something's broken in a system, you want to change it and you want it all to change right away because you're like, well, why would you keep going? This is fucked, and the frustration is that like you can't because it's a machine and machines don't change that way, like
yeah,
if you want the machine to keep running, you can only replace one piece and one part at a time. Like you can't just dismantle it, otherwise you now have a new machine, right?
yeah,
And it's like, so you kind of have to iterate, it's that what is it, it's Odysseus's ship, and every plank
oh
gets
yeah,
replaced until the point where it's like, is it now that is it the original ship anymore? And
yeah,
that's sort of the goal, but that metaphor is about it being over time, right?
hmm,
And you have to sort of decide for yourself, like, is it worth me sticking around and helping replace each part, or is it better for me to just jump ship and find a whole new boat, right?
absolutely. And I
um
thought a bit about it, and I thought, like, I could have been an agent of change in that world, but
sure.
the energy that it was going to take
Yeah.
for
Well,
me
not
was
every
going to,
fight is your fight.
exactly. And I wish that it could have been, right, like, but I just felt like at all points it was going to be a fight constantly.
Yeah.
And I knew that it was going to ruffle some people's feathers, and I frankly, I just didn't care enough about that
Yeah.
particular group of people. Right, like,
Yeah.
why why worry about that, right? Like, I can make social change in other ways. I can commit my energy to like similar causes, but in different outputs. Like, I remember
Mhm.
actually at one point before I left, they invited me to join the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Committee, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, who else is on it? And it's just like, white guy, white guy, white guy, white guy, white guy. And I said, thank you for the invitation. Absolutely not. And
Yeah.
here's why. And until this committee starts to actually, like, look a bit more like the people you are supposedly trying to prop
Yeah.
up with your mandate, like,
Maybe
I'm
be
not
equitable
interested.
and inclusive.
Exactly. It was so weird. It was so funny.
I love it. That kind of leads me into the first sort of big question that I've been introducing in this new round of interviews, and it's this. We in our last chat we talked about being a friend, right, and what it means to be a friend, and I've been kind of expanding that concept into, well, a friend is somebody who's a member of a community, and so okay, then what the fuck is a community, because that's a term I'm seeing a lot, being in community, being a member of this, that, the other thing, and I'm curious to know what, I guess, at the baseline to you, what does a community mean, and then we can kind of roll from there.
Sure. That is such a great question. And I've been thinking a little bit about it since you mentioned it the other day. And I, I've, as of yet, so far, not been able to come up with a succinct answer. So I'm happy that you and I can kind of jam this out a little bit because
That's
I'm
why
kind of
we're
curious myself.
literally that's the point of a
Yeah,
podcast, is to riff.
exactly, exactly. Like, it's funny because that word does get bandied around a fair amount, in our business, of course. Like, I hear about the quote unquote theater community or the film community or the dance
Yep.
community, right? Like, that's fantastic. And I feel very much a part of the theater community here in town. Um, but also, the community that I live in is my neighborhood in Bankview here in Calgary. There's a community association. There's,
Mhm.
my neighbors, the people that live on my street. It's in a way, it's these very disparate definitions about what it might mean, but it's like
Yes.
the one thing that actually has in common is that there's more than one person. And
Yes,
that's
that's
kind
exactly
of
right.
the only thing I've been able to kind of like put my finger on here is like
Hmm.
it's more than one person engaging with something. And that
Hmm.
something can be each other, that something can be a common cause or common interest, can be a common work, can be a common space in
Hmm.
terms of like neighborhood. So it's that. So I think that's where I've come to land. Now, I feel almost in a way the harder part is like, what does that mean to me? And I'm not 100%
Mm.
sure at this time because our world has become so fractured in the last 2 years. And like, I still work in the theater community here. I still create work. I still am grateful for my friends and colleagues. But yet I also feel more distant from it than I ever have. And I'm not sure if that's
Sure.
just because of the pandemic, is that, because we all took, 2 years off to try and, survive.
Survive. Yeah.
Maybe, maybe not. Uh, yeah. And also recognizing that even within that singular community, that there's myriad other communities and that not
Yes.
all, especially in like these arts or fields, certain community members are not treated as equitably as
Hmm.
others, and that
Hmm.
comes from all sorts of systemic reasons, potentially, all these other things. So even within that
Yeah.
larger community, people aren't community. Let me say this again: community members within the community that I feel like I am a part of don't necessarily see themselves as an equal member, and that kind of breaks my
Yes.
heart a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and that's so. This is a kind of the core of, I think, the spirit behind the question is this idea of like, you know, I feel at conflict with the concept of community, because there's this part of me that feels like, well, in one direction, um, we're all a community because we're just humans, and like humans are in community together because that's sort of the nature of what humans are. And it
Mhm.
just it just so happens that the biology of our brain means we can only really hold like a couple hundred connections at a time, and then everyone else just becomes a stranger to us. And
Right.
so that feels like a threat. But then in the other direction, it's like maybe that's what we should be leaning into, and maybe we're actually pushing too hard for big communities, and maybe we actually should be a little bit more closed down, and we should be a little bit more unit based, like maybe that would be healthier for us. I
Mm,
mean, in a lot of directions, you think like, if we were less concerned about the global community, we would have less need for, transcontinental transport and trade and, goods and services and things, and we would be more concerned with like, well, what do we have in front of us right now for the unit,
mm,
and so, you think about all the genuinely earth threatening issues that are coming to a head. I mean, as we record this, half of BC is on fire right now, and
yeah.
it's like, you know if we were to be a little more insular and a little more closed down and maybe a little more exclusive in our communities, like, who knows how we would actually define those parameters, and I'm sure somebody would fuck it up, but like, but it's like that may kind of lead us to being a little bit more eco forward, so I feel such a conflict with these two directions of what I feel like I would like in a community or in my participation in community, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I that's an interesting perspective I had not, honestly not considered. And and it's so interesting to balance that between also like the human urge for curiosity, right? And like
Exactly.
wanting to explore beyond what is just immediately in front of us, because what can also happen in that, the dangerous thing about that is then the sense of other becomes much more tangible, right? And
Yes.
and the greatest strength, I do feel the greatest strength that our species has in common is that when we band together, we can kind of do anything if we actually care about
Mhm.
it. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, and I worry a little bit about if, like, is actually, let me reframe that. I'm curious more about if there's a way to both like narrow and open at the same time, right? Like,
Yes.
you know what I mean? In terms of
Yeah.
what you're saying and like bringing that space in and seeing what's immediately there, it brings the scale down so much. It becomes like those global problems, these massive catastrophes that are happening. Me riding my bike to work tomorrow or whatever isn't gonna fix it all, right?
Exactly.
But that actually might make an impact on the immediate group right in front of my eyes at the same
Exactly.
time. But then not engaging with the broader world can be kind of scary, because then we can just be like, check, we're done, but we're not
Yes.
actually done. We have so much more to
Well,
do. Yeah.
well, and that's just it. And it's like and I feel this conflict about that because there's this part of me that's like, there's so much like psychic agony created by knowing what's going on in the world. Like I read, I found this new news app called Roca News. It started as an Instagram account and then they've got their own app now. And they do just a couple stories a day and then you're done with the app, and it's not a continuous feed. It's just like it's
Hmm.
curated. It's purposely written very not centrist, but it's purposely not written with a slant. It's just fact based with no opinion attached.
Right.
um because it's the argument is like the news is supposed to just tell you the news. It's not supposed to tell you how to feel about the news, right?
Right.
And there's this half of me that's like fascinated, and like I'm on a little streak with it. They've totally gamified it, so it's like I'm on a 40-day streak, and and yada yada yada.
Ooh.
But at the same time too, it's like how much good is it actually doing to my day to know about like Venezuelan politicians being assassinated, or like a coup happening in Niger or something like that. Like I I I I value that knowledge and that curiosity, and that does spark a thought I want to talk about in a sec. But it's like
Hmm.
at the same time too, my knowing that doesn't actually improve my day, which is what kind of has to be at the core of self love and self health, is like
Hmm.
making sure that your needs are center. It's like it's healthy ego, right? It's like
Right.
it's like if I'm going to be able to do anything good, let alone good for the world, whatever that means, like I have to first do good for myself. And I think
Yeah.
that there's so much like there's this like pressure to know stuff, because if you don't know it then you're part of the problem, man. And it's like, well, no, I just have fucking bills to pay. Like, are you gonna, like, um I saw this fantastic post the other day that's sort of tangential, but I feel like related spiritually. Is that former guest of the show, Lauren Malisi, she posted this Ask Me Anything thing, and somebody posted like, oh, I always worry about girls. Of course, they said girls who have an OnlyFans account. and I'm worried that they're whatever, da, da, da. And her reply was beautiful, because it was like, okay, well, if you're worried about me, then how about you pay my student loan, and how about you pay for my moving fees, and how about you pay for the, the things that I'm funding with this OnlyFans. Like, if you're worried about me, why aren't you helping, right? And I just, like, I think I hit a point where it's like, I can only worry about stuff and I can't help stuff. I don't know how to help
Right.
Venezuela. I don't know how to help other countries. I don't even know how to help myself. So why would I waste what limited capacity I have on this sort of, like, knowledge Olympics with strangers on the internet?
Right. Oh my gosh, that's a whole other doing that with strangers. Like, I dip into the comment section. I've never commented once. Please don't
Yeah.
mistake when I say that, but like,
But I read
just out
them.
of I read them just occasionally, just to see what sort of, like, true unhinged perspectives are, like,
Yeah.
flowing out of these things, and just it reminds me. So, I'm not sure what it totally reminds me, but I don't know. It's a pleasurable experience every once in a while, just to kind of, like, dip into that and dip back out and see. So I have
A lot
no
of death
interest in
threats,
engaging that. Oh yeah, there's a lot. Absolutely,
Yeah.
a lot of judgment, a lot of wild accusations of
Mhm.
terrible, terrible things. Yeah.
That's one thing, is that it's like, why would I engage in a discourse that jumps that quickly to just saying go die? It's like, well,
Yeah.
that's not helping
No.
anybody. Like, it's
No.
that's there's no point in telling anybody go kill yourself, because, like, that's a
No.
that's a useless argument for whatever part of the spectrum you fall on. Like,
Yeah.
it's what a bad answer. Um
Yeah.
but you said something before that I wanted to loop
Mm.
back to, about the sort of inherent nature of curiosity in humans. And I've been thinking a lot about this recently, because it's like, we do have this intrinsic curiosity within ourselves. And as you learn history and you go back through, like, great explorers, the tragedy of every explorer is that they inevitably, as you say, they encounter unknowns, people, and then because they're strangers, their first impulse is protection, and so it leads to violence, right?
Right.
And it's, I got really hyper fixated on Alexander the Great, a couple months ago. Read like four books about him, and just
Cool.
became fascinated by him, because he really became this figure to me of, like, he's like a very tragic figure to me, because he obviously had deep seated, like, parent issues, and was just had, like, an inferiority complex, and all he really seemed to want to do was be an explorer. It's just that the nature of the era he lived in was that he had to be a warlord. And so it's like,
Mm.
I feel like if he'd lived centuries later, he would have just been a cartographer or some shit. um
Right.
but then on the flip side, like, his conquests ended up opening up, new known worlds, right? So it's this really hard. I'm not arguing for colonialism. It's just this really difficult, like, it's this really difficult balance of, like, there is good that comes out of exploration. It's just that there is also so much pain.
Oh
and
yes.
and and I don't know how to reconcile that kind of thing.
Yeah. I feel like those are such two separate things, but they come together so much.
Hmm.
Um, like, yeah, curiosity and exploration is so, it's so lovely. Like, it's
Hmm.
so, the idea of it in and of itself is grand. It's the thing that stories are written about. Like, yeah, like, I don't know. I watched Star
Every
Trek as a
story is a
kid.
question.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like it's about those, exploring and seeing what's out there, but then bringing all that baggage along, and that other side of the coin of take, right, and
Mhm, mhm.
consume, and yeah, it's a balanced thing that is scary, and yeah, and I don't know how we can change that, if we can, or
Yeah,
what's next for us too, right? Like, I remember hearing
yeah.
something interesting not long ago about kind of the people of our, like, not just our generation, but our, like, broader generations. How did they say it was, like, we're too old to explore the planet, but too young to explore the stars in a way. And I
Mm.
was like, oh, that's
Mhm.
really interesting because, there's certainly so much to discover about our own world, certainly without a doubt.
Mhm.
But, and then the premise is that of that comment was that, of course, we will become a spacefaring race one day, which
Sure.
we may or may or not, certainly. But I don't know. I thought it was an interesting thing. And what is it about that not having something to explore readily? Um,
Mhm.
what does that do to like the psyche of a people, I guess?
Yeah.
And also with the premise, hopefully that exploration is not colonialist and
Well,
destructive.
and that's just it, isn't it? I'm reading about like there's different countries who are trying to like get back to the moon because they want to set up colonies there, and it's like Russia just like fucked up their landing. They did the first attempt at a landing since the 70s, and they fucked it up, and so now I believe it's Pakistan is has a thing going up, and it's supposed to
Oh,
launch like
cool.
this week, and but it's all with these intentions of these like unilateral colonies. Like it's not with actual exploration or discovery in mind. It's ways to like secure territory,
Yeah.
and that's the same thing. That's why I have no faith in someone like Elon Musk and his like dumbass
No.
fucking Mars probes and shit, because it's like, no, you're like, until you fundamentally change yourself as a human, there's no way that you won't take that with you wherever you go. And so like
Yeah.
that is a deeply broken man, a deeply unhealthy man, who, no matter what planet he lives on, will just be a deeply unhealthy man, and
Yes.
so it's like, I don't want fucking Elon Musk on Mars. Leave Mars alone,
Yeah.
like, fuck off, man.
Yes. Mars currently has considerably fewer assholes on it than Earth does, and
Literally, right? They're doing
yeah,
fine without us, like,
exactly.
fuck, And it's like, why would we want to go to Mars when we're fucking up this planet? Like, what are we gonna do? We're just gonna fuck it up too. So, like, why don't we stop worrying about sending rockets out and start going interior, and
Yeah.
like fix ourselves, right? But
Yes.
I don't know. But that's scary, right? That's a scary,
It
like,
is.
right? Um
Yeah. It
I was
really
talking.
is.
I was talking the other day. You were mentioning this idea of like this like toxic masculine culture, and
Hmm.
how destructive that is, not only for the people around them but themselves. And it's like it's a really hard thing to communicate to somebody who's in pain and doesn't even know it, right? Like they've been bearing that pain for so long, they don't even realize how broken they are. They think
Right.
that that's just normal, right?
Right.
um and it's like, how would you even approach something like that?
I have no idea. I truly have no idea. I guess living as an alternate example is the only thing I can think of. And again, maybe that kind of comes back to what you'd mentioned about just like narrowing that focus a little bit, right? But
Mhm.
if I can, if I can do that for myself and try to be a better person in that regard, then maybe it'll rub off on someone, and maybe it won't. But
Yeah.
I guess that's okay. I have a question for you. What Of two questions? They're very um, different topics, I suppose.
Love it.
But I think I'm kind of curious a bit about what it is that in the years you have been doing this show, um, like I remember way back when, like way, 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 way back when, like lifetimes for us ago, back
Yeah.
when, I think you and I sat down, like we'd known each other a bit, but we weren't like super close pals. I think this was the beginning of us becoming pretty good pals. Was we went? I think it was to Last Best, I like pub here in town, and I remember you were just being like, "I want to start a podcast, and this is what I think I want it to be about," and like this was so long ago. And now you've done that. You've moved cities. Your I think your understanding of who you as a human being has evolved. Your life has
Mhm.
changed in countless ways, and yet this show, even the different iterations of it, has been a consistency. throughout all of those ups and downs that I know you've had
Mm.
and that I've had too. Um,
Hmm.
so kind of keeping like with that show in mind as kind of this consistent point, what is it? What have you learned about people
Mm.
through the lens of that show, through your life over the past 6 or 7 years, however long it is that you've been doing it,
Yeah.
and how has it changed, for the better, for the ill, or not at all? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's my question.
I love that. I think the first impulse thought for me is that I have discovered that there's just so much more love in my life than I ever give myself credit for.
Mm,
That I can very easily slip into self-loathing and apathy and all those fun, you know, feelings. And by continually forcing myself to connect with people who I may be afraid to connect with, or I may be nervous to, or I may be uncertain what we'll talk about, or all those, um,
mhm,
and then we end up having this great time, and I just feel loved, and so I think, yeah, I think the core has just been rediscovering that there's a bottomless well for love at all times,
mm,
anywhere. You do have to go looking for it. It won't always come to you. And I think oftentimes in my life I have fallen into the sort of like a little bit of a victim mentality of like, I'm hurting but I'm going to close off and just wait for someone to notice that I'm not around, and
mm,
and that's not really fair. Like, that's kind of manipulative. And so, sometimes I'm incapable of reaching out, but then there are times when I can. And I think that this podcast has really helped me learn how to reach out and how to take a little bit of ownership from my side. I'm not responsible for other people's behaviors, but I am responsible for my own. And so if I'm lonely and people aren't reaching out, I can ask myself, have I been reaching out? And I bear just as much responsibility in that transaction.
right.
um I think that's one of the core ones. The other thing is that it's like, it has become a real comfort to me knowing that, like, even when I'm stressed and even when I go on hiatus and I take a breather, I know that it's always there because it's in essence, it is just for me. Like, I don't do it for, to become, some big podcast person. Like, I don't do it for accolades or acclaim. I do it because, like, it's really nice for me to get a chance to talk to somebody I've wanted to talk to, and spend an
Hmm.
hour chatting and hearing their stories and hearing their opinions on stuff and being heard too, right? Like, it's just as reciprocal in the other way.
Hmm.
um so that's been what always brings me back, is being like, well, this isn't, success to me is like, did the guest have fun? And in which case,
Right.
cool, whoever listens to it, like, have fun. You know what I mean? Like, like, that kind of stuff doesn't really matter to me. Metrics and SEO and optimizing and yada yada yada. Like, who gives a shit, right? Like, as long as I had a nice time with my guest, then the episode is a success to me.
Right.
And that really keeps me coming back. Um, and that really, both those things have really painted, like, I think I'm not alone in the struggle to find connection and in the struggle to maintain connection. And I think people are really fucking lonely these days. And I think a lot of
Mm,
people don't even necessarily realize how lonely they are until they're asked, how are you feeling? And then they have to
right.
stop and go, oh shit, I've been like ignoring these really deep feelings for a long time. And I really love the opportunity to give that space to hear that.
Hmm.
Um, um, I mean, it's funny that links to, like, to me, what community is like. It's
Yeah.
not about, it's not transactions. It's reciprocity, right?
Right.
It's like what I have the capacity for is what I can offer,
Right.
and then we build that together.
Right.
And I guess my capacity is like, yeah, I can offer you an hour chat every once in a while.
Right. Yeah. Hmm.
um, speaking of like sort of community stuff, this is something I've been wanting to talk to you for a bit. So longtime listeners of the show will be familiar with, for a little while I was doing little filler episodes where I was reading out chapters of a novel that I had written last year. It's since stalled out, and I'm reappraising what I'm even doing with the whole thing. But it was at times loosely and at times very concretely inspired by a trip that I took 2 years ago where I stayed at your house, and you in the writing were used as the template for a character, which I was so nervous about because, as we were talking about before recording, I never wrote with any malicious intent, but after writing it and putting it out and running out of time before sort of asking you about it, I realized like intention doesn't mean anything to impact,
Hmm.
and so I could have written it with all the love in my heart, and you could have still seen something that rubbed you wrong, and that would be completely valid, and I would have hurt you in that case,
Hmm.
and I should and would take accountability for that, and I guess I'm really curious, like, how did it feel initially to sort of like, yeah, be sort of templated into this kind of like pseudo caricature,
Yeah, no, it was super interesting. I listened to that while I was in the south of France. I was kind of just
Mm.
walking around, so just had that for having this like interesting call back to home while I was in a very completely different environment. So yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
interesting, and like I I recognize it. I think on your I think the show's Instagram feed mentioning something about what does this protagonist learn about blind cats or something. I'm like, okay,
Yep, yep.
I have a feeling I know what this is going to be about, and it just
Exactly.
like how just how similar it was, and like I think it was chapter 8, and I don't think I've heard chapter 9. I don't think that's even come out yet,
No, that
but
was the
like
last chapter I
so.
put out. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm kind of like, I need closure on this anecdote. How will this shake out?
Uh,
But like like it was intriguing to me just to hear that, just how close to home it really was, and just how kind of
mm.
spot on. I think the only factual inaccuracy is that that character may not have another beer with you, but I certainly will. Um, uh,
What's funny is the next chapter is like, so we end up finishing the box of beers, and
yes, there, of course, I'm sure it would.
yeah, yeah.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, like I think my feathers were never rankled. I was never concerned about that. I trust you as a human and as a friend and as a writer and artist to like be sensitive to whatever, and that whole thing. There was nothing to be sensitive about, really.
Yeah.
Um, I think the one thing that I found interesting, and this is actually, I mentioned that I had two questions. This was the second
Hmm.
question.
Oh, beautiful.
It
Great.
was directly related to this. Was I think, if I'm right, the question that the chapter title was something around the lines of like, does Brett actually like me, or does he just pretend to care because I'm not, or he's nice, or something in
Yes.
around that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I genuinely wondered if you thought that, and you may and you may not, and I'm a nice guy. I can definitively answer that. You know it, that certainly I do care about you, regardless of
Yeah.
nice guy or not. But yeah, like I was surprised that was a question, and I hoped
Mm.
that you would know that you could always call, like genuinely,
Yeah.
like like, and I really mean that, and I'm I would say this on mic or off mic, and
Yeah.
but like yeah, so I guess, but I don't know what's going on in your writer's mind in that. I don't know if
Mm.
that's like a literary device for you. That's entirely fine. So I guess I hoped that in every interaction that we've had since you moved out of Calgary is that it's that I genuinely do care for you as a friend.
Yeah.
And I truly
Yeah.
do, regardless of any, of any time that's separated and anything like that. So I think that was the only thing that came to my mind is, huh, I hope, I hope he knows for real that that's
Yeah.
true. And even if he doesn't, that I want to make sure that he does.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Anton. That's like genuinely really sweet. That actually hit me really hard. Um,
No, of course.
it's it's funny because it's like I do know that, and I think it was whew, um it was two things. One was like, the narrator at the time in the book is in a very different emotional state than I am, and so
Hmm.
definitely it's a part of that. It's trying to really lean into the anxiety, and it's leaning into the dysregulation, and it's leaning into
Yeah,
that uncertainty, right? And at the same time too, I mean, those are genuine questions I have asked myself, not just about you, but about everyone.
of
I, I
course.
recently I recently reshared a little, I think it was a TikTok or an Instagram thing I saw, that was like this guy being like, "This is my impersonation of someone I think hates me," and then it's like, "Hi, how are you? Oh my god, I've missed you. Oh, I was just at a party. I just had my birthday. You were invited, but you didn't come. And everyone was asking where you were. And are you free right now? Would you like to go for a beer? I just want to talk, right? And it's just like, and it just felt so real, and it felt so like, because I am somebody, I mean, look, one of the sort of spirits of the show is that, like, through much of my life, I have struggled to maintain friendships, and I have been burned so many times, and I have burned so many times, and so it's like I know how volatile I can be, and I know how volatile I have been, and that's really led me to like a deep distrust of myself that I continue to
Mm,
process through, and that does leave me often questioning authenticity in everything,
right.
derealization, it's
Yeah.
real, and and so, like, I have asked myself that, and then at the same time too, I do know, like, especially by you with using you as the example, I do know that that is genuine, and there is
Mm.
an actual love here, there's an actual friendship here. But, like,
Hmm.
thank you so much for saying it. That really is so kind-hearted and, like, so sweet. And it's
Yeah.
like, it's always nice to hear that you care about someone, or that you're cared about.
Yeah. No, of course. And I also recognize that, like, me asking this question is coming from, something that a work of semi autobiographical, semi fictional work, of a
Yeah,
small snippet of which I've heard a tiny bit
totally.
that I have not seen the rest, right? So, like, I also understand, I make art myself, so I understand that there
Yeah,
are always other contexts. So, yeah, and it had nothing to do with you at all. I was like, I have my own anxieties and my own anxiousnesses,
sure.
and often that is comes around, perception of, how do people perceive who I am and how I go
Yes.
day to day,
Yep.
especially, as a person who is like myself. I'm very, like, conflict averse and very,
Yes.
I often feel, even about causes that I feel very passionate about, I often feel too dumb to engage with it.
Sure.
And so I will, more often than not, choose the way of least resistance, which isn't
Yeah.
always great. Which is, but so because of that, I'm often curious what people see and what people recognize, and if I'm being understood. That's something I always struggle with sometimes, is
Yes.
like,
Yes.
am I making myself understood? So
Mhm.
when, even like, so when a question like that comes up, about a fictional character in a totally different other
Yeah.
work of art that reminds me of myself, um, it makes me ask those questions, right? And, like, is there a ways
Yeah.
for myself to be a better friend? Is the way that I'm, when I leave interactions, do people feel, safe? Do they feel seen?
Yeah.
Do they feel understood as well?
Yeah.
So it makes my head spin sometimes. That's all.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know,
I
that's what good pieces are all about.
Yeah, but at the same time too, like thank you so much for sharing that. I genuinely, because it's like, yeah, it's so interesting, like hearing your side on that, because it's like I wrote it from my perspective, right? And then thinking
Mhm.
through and like it is a narrator, so like there is a division, but at the same time too, I am the writer, and like so every character is me, like
Right.
it's both end, and like I say, it is a question I have personally asked, but I don't think I had reconciled the other side of it, of like what would that make someone feel being asked that, like, because to me it was more an internal question of like, well, I'm unlikable, right? And I hadn't
Mm,
considered the thought of like, well, is that making someone else feel like they're not showing their love, or like,
right.
and that question of being understood hits so hard, of like, you know I know I struggle with all the time. It's why I'm constantly repeating myself, because I'm like, let me try that with like a slight tweak, and
Yeah.
just waste more time, right?
Yeah. Exactly. I do the same
But
thing.
but like you are absolutely, I want to just say clearly and bluntly, you are seen and you are loved, and I feel loved by you, and
Oh, thanks.
I appreciate you so much, and I wonder sometimes, about um not about if we're friends or not, but it's like you're somebody I wish I was better at consistency with. I talk often on the show about being really inconsistent about anything that's not right in front of me, like I
Mm,
don't, I'm autistic and ADHD, so like I just have no object permanence, and so like it's only when I get these flashes of reminders that I go, "Fuck, Anton, shit, I haven't talked to him in 2 months, fuck," and then right? Um, um, but there's no, like, love lost in my heart on my side, and there's no, like, hard feelings, it's just, like, if my heart goes in any, quote, unquote, "negative direction," it's purely, like, I did something wrong, you know what I mean?
mm,
Um,
I know what you mean.
um, which
Yeah.
is, like not a great, we don't need to go in either of those directions. Nobody's done anything
No,
negative. We've just been living,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. Exactly. And I also think that there's value in friendships with people where you may not see them all the time, and that there's the ability to kind of almost pick up exactly where you left off, right? Like,
Exactly.
I don't remember the last time that you and I spoke, but
Mhm.
beyond like over a handful of messages, right? Like,
Yep, yep,
and yet there's a comfort and a shared history for us to just almost pick up pretty much exactly where we left off. And I think that's totally fine. You live in
literally.
Vancouver. I don't live in Vancouver, right? Like, eh,
Yeah.
that's okay. And
Yes, yeah,
that's going to be fine. And like, I'd love for us to hang out more, but the world
but
is
how?
a bigger place, and that's
Yep,
okay. And
yes.
but knowing that we can kind of like come back to this moment, uh,
Mhm.
really whenever is, and that's something I
Exactly.
trust, is like, I don't know when we'll chat again. Honestly, I
Yeah,
don't know. And
yeah,
if you do that trip to Calgary, like, drop me a line. Let's hang out.
yes.
But I know that that next interaction is going to be as pleasant and fun as this,
That's exactly right.
and it doesn't matter if it's in a year. It doesn't matter if it's tomorrow, right? And
Yeah.
so, and there are values to those different types of friendships than the folks that you see literally every single day.
Yep. There's you're speaking to something that I've been working on with my therapist a lot, and I've spoken about it a little bit in past recent episodes about dismantling like black and white thinking, and instead leaning into the curiosity. And you just said it so beautifully about
Mm,
like, you know, it's not that I'll never see you. It's not that I'll always see you. It's that I might see you sometime, and like leaving those doors open, rather than like, because if you close a door, then it's done, right? And then
yes.
you're telling yourself I'm in control of that because it's a closed door or whatever it is. But by leaving it ajar, you're leaving it to just whatever life brings, and
Yeah.
yeah. And it's funny because like, with you, it's like, we've tried a few times. We've tried, like there was trips supposed to be planned and stuff's fallen through and all
Yeah.
kinds of random stuff, right? And life just happens, right? And
Totally.
I think this is such a beautiful, like, for lack of a better word, like case study of like yeah, staying open and staying curious, and just recognizing that, like, you can hold love for someone, and also let them live, right?
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. Absolutely. And also, I hope that, us bringing this up is like, just because you never considered from my point of view in that writing, I
Mhm.
hope that won't stifle your thoughts moving forward.
Oh, no. No, no. Well, I mean, that book's
Yeah.
already written, so whatever's in
Yeah.
there, that's already in there,
Oh,
right?
whatever.
You
Yeah,
know? But,
yeah.
but, like, next whatever projects, like, it's really you're really helping open my eyes to, like, there's not just the internal answer to the question, there's also the external answer to the question, and, like,
Right.
neither has to overpower the other, but they should be considered, you know? And I
Yeah.
really love that. I really value
Yeah.
that.
Thank you.
Um um so I'm cognizant of the time. I think I want to just jump into kind of the wrappy uppy question.
Sure.
Um and we've kind of been touching on it, and that so I don't want to say I know what your answer will be, but I feel like I've already heard some really good suggestions. But as I love to do, I like to leave listeners with sort of an actionable thing they can try out this week. And so, what do you think is something that they could try doing to be a better friend this week?
Oh, what a lovely question. Um, I think what they should do is take a minute and scroll through your phone, and find someone you haven't texted in a little while. I feel like this advice has been given on your show previously, and in fact, I can think of at least two people off the top of my head. I'm a
I give
listener,
this
not
advice
just a
to myself
guest.
every day. Yeah.
Yeah, but just, but like, yeah, scroll through that phone, pick someone you haven't seen for a little while, and just say, "Hey, hope you're good." Don't maybe phrase it in a way that where that can be a kind of a closed interaction, that you're not
Hmm.
putting them on the spot to get back to you. If they do, they will. That's lovely, and that'll start something. And if they don't, that's totally cool too. It could be that they got your
Yeah.
text in the car and we're like, I'll deal with that later, and then 6 weeks later they message you back. I do that all the time. um,
Same. Literally
and
same.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that's something that could be simple, and we do have, despite the technology that keeps us apart, it also keeps us connected. And I think,
Mhm.
and I would suggest a text message over a call, which is rife with all sorts of like societal anxiety,
Sure.
or for me, I'll speak for
Sure.
myself. But that text message can probably go a long way, and just to say,
Yeah.
oh hey, how's it going, and just drop that. um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and
I love it.
yeah, I think that's the I'm gonna try to do that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the thing. I feel really charged up by, because like, yeah, once again, coming back to like that, I feel like that happens to us all the time. Somehow we have like a sixth sense for texting each other at like what's a great time for me and a terrible time for you, or vice versa,
yeah.
and it'll happen to me all the time. I'll get a text from you and I'll be like, fuck yeah. And I'll put my phone away because I can't text at the moment. And then, yeah, a month will go by and I'll go, oh, fuck,
Oh
right?
yeah, I do it all the time. It's terrible. It's terrible.
I love it. So, what do you have coming up? Do you have anything you want to plug? Do you have anywhere you would like listeners to find you, follow any of your work, or anything like that?
um, what have I got to plug? Oh gosh. You know what? I'm not gonna plug myself. Can I make some like podcast recommendations instead?
Fuck yeah, you can.
Okay, cool. Yeah, like my stuff is fine, but I've been really listening to a lot of podcasts lately, and that makes me excited.
Yeah.
I okay. The one show I will suggest that people, if they want a great little escape from reality, but is also like also is like a really well thought through and well reported show. There's a podcast called Imaginary Worlds, that's out
Okay.
there. It's hosted by a guy named Eric Malinsky. He's a former This American Life producer and reporter, and he's kind of
Amazing.
done this podcast, and he's made a business out of it. It's their tagline is Imaginary Worlds, why we create them and why we want to suspend our disbelief, or something like that. So it's
Mm.
like looking at society and culture through the lens of like science fiction fantasy. stories.
I'm already sold. I love it.
It's lovely. It's really lovely. And if you download, I think what is their most recent episode? I don't know when you're releasing this, but at least one of the episodes that came out in the summer. It's about television shows that were canceled too soon, and he did a listener call out. And I got to go on and speak very eloquently about one of my favorite canceled shows, Carnival. So I'm going to recommend that.
Wow.
Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
Carnival, there was a show. Holy
Oh,
shit. Season
so
1
good.
was incredible.
Oh my.
I think I might have actually not finished season 2 because I knew it got canned, and so I was too
Yeah,
disappointed,
yeah.
I'm gonna look out for that episode. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, it should be out now. I think it just came out very recently. It's a two-part episodes. One is about like special gems of shows that people may not have heard of that is quite good. But
Yeah.
the first half is that. So you'll hear me speak eloquently about that. His editing was
Love it.
very, very good. And
Love
I'll also
it.
recommend another podcast called Bellwether. It was an independent show that came out. I don't know. It came out a while ago, 2 years ago or so. It's written, produced by a, a journalist I really respect named Sam Greenspan. They used to be one of the founding producers for 99% Invisible. If you ever heard
Mm.
that, like big time stuff. So
Mhm.
when I was in Prague, I follow Sam on Instagram, and I saw that they and their partner Shing were in Prague just randomly, and Sam and I had a interaction years and years ago about something else. So I kind of just I reached out randomly. Randomly, I was like, "Hey, are you in Prague for the quadrennial?" And they're like, "Yeah, want to go hang out?" I'm like, "Yes, I do."
Fuck
So,
yes.
Sam and Xing and Meg and I went out for dinner. We went to see a show and just hung out and just talked about podcasting and about the world. And Sam's in an interesting career transition right now and trying to figure out what they want to do next. And Xing is just she's just this amazing, interesting puppeteer, builder, and fascinating
Gotcha.
artist. And and it was just fabulous. And so anyway, Sam made this amazing show called Bellwether. I think it's a 6 or 8 part series they call speculative journalism, and it's kind of got a science fiction frame, and then reporting real stories, and then and then this fictional narrative that's also happening within that's supporting it. I think it's a real fascinating piece, and I
Love
think people
it. Yeah.
should go listen to it.
100%. I will link both of those. I mean, I'm gonna go listen to those right now,
Yeah,
but everybody else can listen to it when the episode comes out because those are in the
yeah,
show notes.
totally,
So that's amazing.
awesome.
Thank you so much, Anton. You're just the best. I
Oh,
love you so
thank you.
fucking much.
You too, brother.
I love chatting with you. This has been such a nice time, and there's this part of me that um doubling back onto the novel for just a second, I was inspired to write it because partially inspired by you and partially inspired by that trip and our conversations and just
Awesome.
you know you're somebody who continues to inspire me and I just deeply value you in my life. So thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
just being you and doing your thing.
That means a lot to me. I really appreciate
Yeah.
that, and
Yeah.
I can't wait till we get to hang out in person. And you know what?
Woo.
Who knows when that'll be, and that's okay.
And that's it. Thank you so much to Anton for coming back on the show. It was such a pleasure to catch up with him. The links to the shows that he mentioned are in the show notes. I have been listening to Bellwether and absolutely loving it. I cannot recommend it enough. It's actually going into this week's newsletter as well, so be sure to check those shows out. You're gonna love them. Speaking of the newsletter, why not sign up for my weekly Substack? You are going to get free access to a brand new poem, a brand new micro essay, a brand new playlist on Spotify, and so much more. It's been an absolute blast putting these out, and I think you're going to love them. Again, you can sign up for those in the show notes. One last thing before I go. I have started a new separate Instagram account for sharing my poetry writing. So you can follow me at Hey Sorry I Missed You on Instagram. I'm hoping to expand this to TikTok, maybe do some, of those really fun videos with the music and the sad and the playing and getting the hits and the algorithm and all those things. But for now, it's on Instagram and it is a ton of fun. I've been sharing some of the key poems from my collection First Dates with Pro Wrestlers that I'm hoping to have published next year. So feel free to check those out. Again, links in the show notes. Follow me. It's a ton of fun. I've been getting some amazing feedback, amazing love, and I cannot thank you enough for it. But that is it for me this week. Nothing massive to report other than those. So I'm just going to wrap this up here. I got myself a little bit of a cold, so I'm going to give my voice a rest for the rest of the day. But hey, I'll be back next week with another brand new episode, and I hope to catch you there. But I'm not going to worry about that now, and neither should you, because that is then, and this is now. So for now, all I'm going to say is I love you so goddamn much, and I wish you well. Fun and safety, sweeties.